Wait, how did we even get here? Well, let's start from the beginning. On the 3rd of August, 1970, Masahiro Sakurai would be born. Okay, wait, we really don't need to go that far back. Let's just start here. 1995, where Sakurai would find himself in an arcade playing King of Fighters 95, as he often did, with plans to just play by himself, but as he's playing, someone on the other side of the cabinet starts a battle, and Sakurai accepts the battle. Since Sakurai has a lot of experience in this game, he quickly and decidedly ends the match in his favor. But something seemed off. They weren't really fighting back, and they were clearly inexperienced. So he decided to try to catch a peek at who he was fighting, and through a reflection, he saw that it was just a couple, and the one he just destroyed was the girlfriend. In an interview in 2004, Sakurai would be asked about this event. "You annihilated a complete newcomer." To which he would reply, "Yeah, I crushed her." This is clearly not a memory he's very proud of, and it would make him start thinking about how hard it can be for newcomers to gaming to compete with longtime players. This is where Sakurai would start thinking about how you could make a fighting game that would appeal to longtime gamers, but also let newcomers enjoy it as well. In 1998, he would begin working, initially starting out with a prototype called Dragon King the Fighting Game, which, while inspired by fighting games, Dragon King took a more aerial approach to fighting games with a bigger stage and platforms that you can drop down and jump through, inspired by the platforming genre. However, Sakurai felt like this game was missing something: atmosphere. And his idea to fix this issue was, well, to have Nintendo characters beating each other up instead. And so he asked, "Hey Nintendo, can I make Yoshi beat Mario with a baseball bat?" Nintendo was like, okay, sick, thanks. And so, Super Smash Bros. Was born. And instantly, Super Smash Bros. Was a smash success. Okay, it ended up selling almost 2 million copies in Japan, and almost 3 million copies in the United States. A really big part of its success was just how unique it was, and to really understand what made it so unique, we need to talk about the percentage system, because it's here that you find a lot of the key differences between Smash and traditional fighting games. In a normal fighting game, the goal is to decrease your opponent's HP bar from 100 to 0, which, if accomplished, makes you win the round. However, in Smash, Sakurai decided that just a boring old HP bar wouldn't be good enough. So he created the percentage system, which works like this. All attacks deal damage, as well as knockback. That damage increases your opponent's percentage, which in turn makes them take more knockback. And the more knockback they take, the easier it is for you to knock them off the screen, which is the goal of a platform fighter. Once you do knock them off the screen, you take their stock, or life, which you have some amount of depending on the game. In the case of 64, the most common rule set uses 5 stocks. Also, what I've referred to as off-screen is usually known as blast zones in other games. But this new radical approach to combat is what, in my opinion, really sets apart the genre as more than just a weird spin-off of fighting games. But it's genuinely a really smart mechanic that allows for a lot of nuance, and removes it from the binary of dead or not dead. You can be close to dying, but keep living over and over again. You're never gonna be at 1 HP. Another reason for platform fighters to feel so unique is that every character is very distinct, at least the non-clone ones, in a way that normal fighting games straight up can't replicate. Like, the way they fall is unique, their speeds in all ways are unique, their weight, their moves, the entire feel of a character can vary wildly. But also, like, in what other game could you have Mario and Samus fight, Link and Pikachu, Jigglypuff and Luigi? There's just something really special about a crossover like that. One of Sakurai's many inspirations for Smash was a game called Outfoxies, a kind of fighting game, but like Smash, it has a much larger and more interactive stage, and generally just has a lot of similar ideas. Some people consider Outfoxies to be the first platform fighter, but to me it doesn't quite fit the bill. So let's get back to Smash, shall we? New additions like items also brought a ton of interesting things to the game, and I think we all have some fun memories of playing Smash with family, with items on, and something crazy happens. Another unique factor to Smash compared to traditional fighting games are the stages. While in most traditional fighting games, the stages are simply visual, and if they do have any sort of impact, it's usually very small. In Smash, however, every single stage is completely different, from layout to blast zone size and just overall stage setup, which can radically change how you would play a match. So Smash was obviously doing really well, but I'm kind of understating how much of a success this was for something so radically different from the rest of the fighting game market. And when you make a game this successful, you bet people are gonna want a sequel. And this time, Sakurai was gonna go all out. After finishing the development of Smash 64, Sakurai would almost immediately begin working on the next installment of the series. But he felt like the first game was lacking in scale. He wanted more characters, more stages, more items, more modes, better graphics, bigger, better, more, and more. The development process for the next Super Smash Bros. Game was a grueling one, to say the least. Sakurai and his team would work for 13 months straight, and personally, Sakurai never took any breaks during that time period. Well, except for the time where he literally passed out and was put in the hospital. But after that, he would of course begin working right away. However, it would all end up paying off. Eventually, in November of 2001, Super Smash Bros. Melee would release on Nintendo's newest home console, the GameCube. And to this date, Melee is still considered a masterpiece by many. Melee has a very distinct game feel. Everything is faster, combos feel smooth, and movement is freeform with very few restrictions. New mechanics like wave dashing add a depth that Smash 64 was kind of lacking. However, it still holds on to many concepts from 64, but updates most of them in some way. Sakurai's vision for a massively expanded Smash Bros. Games was also certainly achieved. With the number of characters going from 12 to 26, the number of stages would also be massively increased, going from just 9 stages in 64 to 29 stages in Melee. And as I talked about earlier, stages are a really big part of the genre, so Melee having 29 is really good. There's of course also a whole bunch of new items, but on top of this, there's also more single player content, such as target practice and All-Star mode. In All-Star mode, you go through and fight every character in the game with a rest area in between where you can heal up. And I'm just mentioning this because I actually find this place to be like kind of beautiful in some way. Just like, yeah. Anyways, eventually, grassroots competitive scenes would pop up all over the world for Melee, with people just wanting to prove that they were the best at Melee. And since then, Melee has only really grown. I'll get into Melee in the modern day later, so just keep that in mind. So obviously, people really liked Melee, with great reviews all around, but not just that. Melee would sell so well that the ownership rate among GameCube owners for Melee would be 25%, meaning that 1 in 4 GameCube owners would also own Melee, which is a kind of an insane statistic for a non-bundled in game. All of what Melee would accomplish is of course really impressive, but it really is a miracle that it turned out the way that it did when you consider the ridiculous time frame of development of just 13 months. Although it's pretty obvious in some areas that the game was far from finished, multiple moves just straight up lack hitboxes due to programming mistakes, and some things just straight up don't work, and there's glitches like you wouldn't believe. Yet still, Melee holds up to this very day, due to Sakurai and his team's hard work. It's clear that Melee was made with love and passion, and probably also a whole bunch of caffeine if I had to guess. However, after working so hard he literally passed out on Melee, Sakurai wanted a break from working on Smash, which makes sense. So he decided to leave HAL Laboratories and search out smaller projects to work on in the meantime. We find ourselves at an E3 press conference in 2005, around 4 years after the release of Melee. Here, Nintendo are announcing and talking about their upcoming home console, the Revolution. Satoru Iwata would state that with the new Wi-Fi capabilities of the Revolution console, some games could take advantage of that. He then goes on to state that he would make sure that one of those games to take advantage of it would be a Super Smash Bros. Game.
We are already working on several Wi-Fi titles, and I am pushing our team to make sure Smash Bros. Is one of them.
Which surprised a lot of people, including Sakurai. Sakurai had not heard anything about this Wi-Fi Smash game for the Revolution, but after the conference, Satoru Iwata and Sakurai would end up in a meeting to talk about this new Smash game. Here, Iwata would ask Sakurai if he was willing to help work on it, or if he was really done with the series after the insane amount of work he put in to make Melee. But even after all that, Sakurai decided to help make the next Smash game. One of the most common complaints for Melee was how hard it was for beginners to pick up the game, and newcomers would often be discouraged after playing against better players. So for this next entry, he would really try to hone in on accessibility and beginner friendliness. Quote, "I think it's more important to aim for, within the population of people who play video games, the people who are at the bottom, the players at the base, where it's wider, people who on a basic level don't really care about games. Having something that appeals to them so that they can play is vital, I think." Unquote. But before Nintendo was able to make another game, one of the first Smash fan games, at least one of the first actually good Smash fan games, would release in August of 2006. Super Smash Flash. A Flash game. A platform fighter somewhat inspired by Melee, but with a bunch more characters from all over like Cloud from Final Fantasy, Sonic, Mr. Incredible for some reason, Naruto, but also just some fun, goofy gameplay. Some well-made pixel art, and all around just really solid game. With Super Smash Flash being free and also releasing at a time where people just really wanted good Flash games, it's not a surprise that Super Smash Flash became as popular as it did. And while it's not exactly the best looking game, nor is it a very cohesive experience, but it doesn't really need to be. What it needed to be is just fun, which it was. But anyways, in October of 2005, Sakurai and the team would begin working on what is now known as Super Smash Bros. Brawl. However, this time it wouldn't be quite as stressed as Melee. With a development time of around 2 years and just a couple months, they were able to expand not just the roster or the stage list, but make an entire single-player campaign, comparable in size to like an entire game, just in one mode. Of course, I'm talking about the Subspace Emissary, which was really where the series started to have more lore and a proper story to it. But let's talk about that later. For now, Brawl was steadily going through its development, and after a short delay, it was ready to release in January of 2008. Brawl had a lot of hype, not just from the pre-existing Melee scene, but by pretty much all gamers. I mean, they're literally adding Sonic, Nintendo's rival, and they're also adding Snake? Snake? But of course, the competitive Melee scene was also just very excited. But when the game released, many quickly realized that, well, Brawl was different. And I think when Sakurai talked about aiming for the people at the base, this is how he was gonna do it, by slowing the game down. One of the ways he would slow down the game was by adding mechanics such as tripping, which would randomly make you trip over sometimes just from running, which immensely decreased the amount of combos, speed, and just overall flow of the game was slowed down massively. So while the competitive scene were not really fans of this new game, the casual audience and newcomers were loving it. In fact, they were loving it a lot. Brawl will go on to sell 13 million copies. So for this crowd of people, it really did strike a fantastic balance of competitiveness and fun goofiness. The items were super fun, the characters were great, especially some of the newcomers like Snake and Sonic, Lucario, Wolf, King DDD, Pit, Lucas, Wario, and some others I'm sure I'm forgetting. As a kid playing Brawl, nothing was cooler than Final Smashes, a new mechanic added to Brawl that had been considered but ultimately scrapped for both Melee and 64, but was finally added in Brawl. Final Smashes are like an ultimate attack, the most powerful move in a character's kit, only usable after destroying a new item, the Smash Ball, that would appear on the stage and float around until somebody destroys it. Final Smashes are honestly a super cool mechanic that makes you want to play so many different characters just to see what kind of Final Smash they have. From Brawl onwards, all Smash games would have Final Smashes. Something else that really sets Brawl apart was, of course, Subspace Emissary, the proper story mode, revolving around the player rescuing iconic characters from mind control that's turning them evil, and then using those saved characters to save more and more, while fighting bosses and platforming. Subspace Emissary is also just a really big game. A playthrough can take around 8 to 10 hours, which while that maybe doesn't sound all that long, it's kinda crazy when you consider that it's just one part of the game. Since it was on the Revolution, or what we now call Wii, Brawl would also be the first Smash title to have official online support. You could play with people all over the world, as long as you had an internet connection. However, at the time, internet speeds weren't really that good, and the netcode probably also wasn't all that great. It's functional at least, I believe. Well, not right now, but you know, it could be functional. But yeah, Brawl will be the first to have it, and since then, every future Smash game has had it, most of which being better and perfectly fine. While Brawl isn't exactly looked back on too fondly, it still holds a special place in my heart, and I'm sure many others. And I still believe it to be the best Smash game for casual play. Nothing really competes with its goofiness, which is kind of weird considering the art style of the game being so serious, which always felt kind of weird, but this is kind of just what the early 2000s looked like. I'd like to end off this Brawl section with another Sakurai quote. One of the things that I felt when reflecting on Melee was that while a higher game speed is definitely exhilarating and fun, it makes the gap between beginners and higher level players too large, and you can't really enjoy carefree, leisurely aerial battles. On the contrary, you might say that it makes the game rough, but it does shrink the breadth of the game a little. So this time, I made the speed slower, but on that point, I think it would be best to think of Brawl and Melee separately and enjoy them each in their own way. Now, do you remember when I mentioned those Melee players who weren't so happy with how Brawl turned out? Eventually, some of these people would end up making Project M, or PM. A mod for Brawl that almost completely reworked the entire game to make it feel and play more like Melee. This mod was developed by a team simply known as the PM Dev Team. However, they're so successful with this mod that eventually it will become not just a niche little thing people will play for fun as like a what if Brawl was good, but it legitimately became a game that was played almost to the same level as the official Smash games. Which honestly makes a lot of sense when you consider just how well made this mod truly is. They didn't just make Shine faster and added L-Can's thing, there are massive additions here. I mean, like entire character reworks. There are some serious gems of game design in this Brawl mod for people who just wanted to take a children's party game more seriously. PM is really where the modern melee-inspired platform fighter began to really have a foundation. Modern games like Rivals Vaether, Combo Devils, Framemakers all have very clear inspiration from PM, which is just so cool. You know when you criticize things and sometimes people will say, well, you couldn't make that yourself. But they really said, no, I could do better. PM would mark the first, mostly non-Nintendo made platform fighter to actually be taken serious by the Smash community. A very impressive feat to be sure. Jumping forwards to late 2015, all Project M development would stop as the PM dev team moved on to other projects and or just moved on with their lives. At some point, Nintendo would also start shutting down tournaments with PM in the lineup, which I won't get too deep into right now, but basically, fuck Nintendo. So, I would have loved to talk more about PM here, because it really is a special game that is honestly so cool, but I am just not an expert on PM, and it's not exactly easy to find information about it. However, if you feel like I did miss something noteworthy about any game, be sure to leave it in the comments, as after about a week or so after I release this video, I will pin a comment including a whole bunch of interesting stuff that I maybe should have shown or mentioned, or correct any mistakes, or make sure that I credit people whose footage I used in this video. So just comment if there's anything I missed, please. Thank you. So at this point, the platform fighting genre had really established itself. However, Smash was pretty much the only game worth mentioning, until now. Because after seeing the success of Smash, some genius at Sony thought, hey, what if we just did that, but Kratos and Sackboy? And so they did. Originally, Naughty Dog, the developers of games like Uncharted, were supposed to make this game, but they were busy making The Last of Us. It's kind of insane to think about an alternate reality where Naughty Dog, instead of making The Last of Us, made this game, but since they were working on The Last of Us, another team called Superbot Entertainment, with help from Bluepoint Games, would take on this project in 2009, and then PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale would be released in November of 2012. To raving success! Yeah, not really. I mean, it did fine, I guess, but it's kind of hard to compare to Smash, not just in sales numbers, but when it comes to cultural impact, it almost feels like this game never even existed. Outside of that one time when Kratos implied that it was actually canon.
But I'd also heard that you once fought in a tournament.
I fought in many contests.
But this particular one, I heard you did battle with beasts, scoundrels, princesses, the undead, automatons, and history's greatest musician. That's not true, is it?
I would not speak of this.
But, yeah. But its lackluster impact is kind of sad, because there are some interesting gameplay decisions made here. Like how there's no percentage, no blast zone, and the only way you can kill someone is with an ultimate? Which, if you listen to when I talked about what even makes a platform fighter, you might be thinking to yourself, hey, this isn't really all that much of a platform fighter, is it? And to that I say, yes, correct. It really isn't all that much. But as much as it's not really a platform fighter, it's so obviously an attempt at capturing Smash's thunder that I had to include it. And I'd still say it is a platform fighter, but it's barely. Also, some of the characters in this game need to be put in another platform fighter. Kratos has some really good potential for a moveset in an actually good game, as well as Cat from Gravity Rush, who's just really cool. But anyways, my main point in bringing this game up is to establish that this is really where people started using the term Smash clone. And it is not a term you're gonna ever stop hearing, if I had to guess. After finishing and releasing Brawl to massive success, Sakurai would finally get his well-deserved break from Smash, as he moved on to other projects such as Kid Icarus Uprising for the recently released at the time 3DS. Not long before Kid Icarus Uprising was released, they would announce a new Smash game was coming to the 3DS. With Brawl, some felt that they took the whole beginner friendliness a little bit too far towards competitive hatred, but this time around Sakurai was gonna really strike that perfect balance. At E3 2013, they would officially announce Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo 3DS and Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, aka Smash 4, aka Smash 4, aka Smash Force for the Wii U and 3DS4. And from the amazing titles, you can tell that this game would not only be for the current generation home console, but also the 3DS handheld as well, which must have been an insanely hard thing to do considering the large power difference between those two consoles. Eventually, the game would release in 2014, and the reception was actually really good, getting good scores all around from critics, and for Brawl players, this was almost unanimously considered an upgrade. While Smash 4 still has a similar game feel to Brawl, compared to Melee at least, it is certainly a good amount faster. But although it is faster, it's still very clear that the focus was on defensive play. A common thing people will joke about is run-up shield, obviously referring to running up to someone and then shielding, but this was a seriously big part of the game. Most things were very punishable on shield, or at the very least had no negative impact on the person shielding. In general, the stats of the shields in this game were just really strong. On top of shielding though, which is exclusive to the ground, Smash 4 also had an amazing air dodge. There's just no real downside to clicking air dodge all the time. It would often just end combos and just generally slow down the pace of the game. The strengths of defensive play is what would eventually define Smash 4, at least in my opinion. But when it comes to new content, one really cool feature Smash 4 for the 4DS Wii U Deluxe Edition came with is selectable special moves, which basically just gave every character, except the DLC, a bunch more specials that you can choose from, going from it's just a worse version of the default to an actually pretty cool upgrade that not only just makes it better, but changes the whole way you want to use it. And sometimes it's also just insanely broken. To be honest, this mechanic is really cool, and I'd love to see it make a comeback in a bit more of a functional form, and maybe they're just a bit more balanced, because I really love when you can customize a game even more to your specific playstyle. It's a super underrated feature, and it's something that I really think deserves another look in another game. When people talk about Super 4 for the UD, the thing that probably comes to mind is of course Bayonetta, the last DLC fighter introduced. But let's quickly talk about the other DLC characters. Smash 4 was the first Smash game to ever get DLC characters added post-launch, which basically just means that you can buy new characters even after the game was out. In total, 7 characters were added as DLC, but I'm only going to talk about the newcomers, which narrows it down to 4. Ryu from Street Fighter, Cloud from Final Fantasy, Corrin from Fire Emblem, and last but not least, Bayonetta from Bayonetta. First off, I gotta say that the implementation of Ryu was really well done. Ryu is of course from a traditional fighting game with no platforms or anything, very grounded gameplay, and somehow they successfully translated that into platform fighter, which is really cool. Getting Cloud from Final Fantasy must have also been insanely cool. So when bringing him into Smash, they obviously had to capture the feeling of swinging around such a big sword. But seriously, some of his attacks are so insanely big, it's just funny. Like, what are these hitboxes, man? Although Bayonetta often gets the most hatred, deservedly so, Cloud probably caused comparable damage considering just how easy he was to use effectively. That's not even to mention how completely insane he was in doubles. So strong that double Cloud would be banned, so you could only have one Cloud per team. But that still does not compare to the havoc Bayonetta caused. Bayonetta just had so many things. Getting hit once was often just a stock lost right there. I mean, there is really nothing Bayonetta couldn't do. But, you know, it's fine. New characters in games are broken all the time. They can just fix her up in a patch, right? Well, since she was the last character to be added, they just didn't patch her. She was supposed to be that last hurrah for the game, which I can only imagine felt like a massive finger to the community, because Bayonetta completely changed the game. But even so, I feel like Bro Smash for the Wii U 3D Smash 4U set a really good precedent for the future when it comes to DLC characters. But hopefully they would be a bit more balanced next time around. At this point, Smash has become a massive cultural phenomenon, easily being one of the best-selling games on any console it would find itself on. I mean, everyone knows Smash. My grandma probably knows about Smash. And with a series this big, it's of course just natural that others would attempt to copy their success. For example, Sony All-Stars Battle Royale, Kung Fu Panda Showdown of Legendary Legends. What is it with this genre and having horrible names? Then there's of course Shrek Super Slam, and there's just a whole bunch of these types of games. But then we also have the indie platform fighter, which at this point was really starting to pick up steam with releases like Rivals of Aether, Icon's Combat Arena, and Slap City, all just trying to prove that the platform fighting genre can be more than just a Smash clone, and that the genre itself actually has a lot of merit. Whether they succeeded in that or not, well, that depends. First off, I want to talk about Rivals of Aether. Released in 2015, Rivals started out as a spiritual successor to one of Dan Fernacci's, developer of Rivals' previous platform fighters called Super Smash Land, which was a Super Smash Bros. Remake that tried to imagine what a Smash game for the Game Boy could look like. So it's obviously massively stripped down. A bunch of gameplay mechanics from Smash, such as shields, grabs, ledges, are all missing in Rivals, partly due to Super Smash Land, but also probably due to budgetary constraints, considering that this was just a solo project funded by himself. Yet Rivals was still a massive success, getting all-around good reviews, great sales, consistent player numbers, and a healthy competitive scene. And the main reason for Rivals 1's success is, in my opinion, the characters. In Rivals, every character has a gimmick. Sometimes it's more than one, but every character has some sort of unique mechanic that completely changes how you approach your game plan. Let me give you some examples. Let's look at Forsburn. Forsburn's gimmick is smoke. Within Forsburn's smoke, you're unable to see him, and this goes for the Forsburn player as well, by the way, which can let him sneak around and do really interesting things with his other really good tool, which is Clone. Forsburn is able to summon an AI clone that kinda just walks around. However, there's no difference between the real and the fake Forsburn, which can make him insanely confusing to fight against, which he takes great advantage of, and is his main game plan. Another thing that Smoke can do, outside of just letting him hide, is that Forsburn can absorb his smoke, and after absorbing the smoke, he gains a new move that lets him use up the smoke that he just absorbed, an extremely powerful and fast move. Or he could also use it to summon a Super Clone. Super Clone, unlike the normal clone, can be controlled by the Forsburn player themselves, letting them do some insane stuff. Forsburn can just summon a teammate to help him out pretty much. Just Forsburn is like the best stealth character I've ever seen in any fighting game ever, which is insane when you think about the fact that Forsburn is kind of like a boring designed character if you compare it to something like Sylvanos or Eliana, who I'm just not gonna talk about again because it would require like 5 minutes. But what I'm trying to get at is that the character design is really where Rivals has a lot of its strengths. But even outside of that, Rivals also just has a really solid engine and is a great fun game with really good movement and really just everything is good. Oh, and I should also probably just mention that Rivals has a Steam Workshop which lets anybody create their own characters and other things for the game, which is really cool. And if you've ever heard of Rivals of Aether and you don't know that much about this genre, you probably just know it as the game with like Ronald McDonald in it, which is just really cool. I mean, if you want to play as Goku or Germa or again Ronald McDonald, Fox, Shrek, I mean pretty much any character you can think of is probably in the Steam Workshop for Rivals, which is again just a bonus to like a really great game. Now let's look at a game that wasn't quite as successful, Icon's Combat Arena. Developed by Wavedash Games, Icons was supposed to be a true, fast-paced, high-skill platform fighter, and a sort of successor to PM, with Wavedash Games hiring multiple PM devs to make the game. A developer at Wavedash Games stated in an interview that their focus was to nail Smash-like gameplay and provide top-notch online play. Few fighting games at the time had really any sort of focus on online play, and it was mostly treated as an unimportant afterthought. Icons was going to be different though. They believed that if they could just get the game to feel good to play, and then have the best online, well then everybody who wanted to play online would of course just play Icons, which was honestly pretty ahead of its time, since nowadays good rollback netcode is just expected. After a 2-year development cycle, the game would be showed off at EVO 2017, and if you don't know, EVO is the biggest fighting game tournament in the world, and you can kind of think of it like the Super Bowl of fighting games. And well, the reception wasn't great. And to be honest, I completely understand it because, well, it's pretty ugly. And just to be clear, graphics like this were not really acceptable to a lot of people in 2017. And just as a reminder, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild came out in 2017, Horizon Zero Dawn came out in 2017, and even just within indies, games like Cuphead were coming out, and just 1 year later, things like Subnautica were coming out. The art style also isn't especially appealing, and the animations look kind of sloppy. But maybe all that's fine if they just nailed Smash-like gameplay, right? And I mean, yeah, it definitely looks like Smash, but it almost looks a little bit too much like Smash. It was very clear that they didn't only take inspiration from Smash, but downright copied a lot of things. Entire characters seemed like rip-offs. A couple of years later, a developer would even go on to say that the Icons reveal was one of the saddest moments of their lives, which I can understand, since this reveal pretty much sealed the fate of Icons. On release, the game would immediately flop and struggle to even stay afloat, and was ultimately just not profitable or successful enough. Part of this could also be due to a lack of content, such as there only being 7 characters on launch, and only 3 of them being unlocked for free in the beginning. With the pitch of Icons being a free game, they would of course need some way to let players spend money for in-game rewards such as cosmetics. The system they decided to go for was loot boxes, which was universally disliked and was also happening around the time where people were really starting to talk about how bad loot boxes actually are for games. Seemingly the one saving grace Icons had was its new characters. Afi and Galu are actually a really unique character where you can control one out of two characters at a time, but you can switch between the two, with one of them being fire and the other being water based, and they both have a unique moveset, which is really cool. Even with their hints of creativity, too much of Icons was built on previous ideas without iterating too much on them. Eventually, the game would shut down in November of 2018, not very long after the launch. Rivals was able to successfully garner a fanbase, despite its pretty big deviation from Smash, and Icons was ultimately unable to stand on its own feet, largely due to the fact that it's so similar to Smash. So is the secret to a successful indie platform fighter just changing as much as possible? Well, it might seem like that because one of the genre's biggest games of all time, Brawlhalla, was just about to release. Brawlhalla had been in development for a long time, as well as being in open beta since 2015, but in October of 2017 it would be fully launched, and it was going to change a lot. First off, no shields. Normal characters? Nope. Good netcode? You bet. How much does it cost? No. What? It's free. It's free and it's new and it's different. The gameplay is honestly very different from Smash, more so than almost every other platform fighter I'm going to be talking about this video. It's much floatier, and the biggest standout of the game, the weapon system, fundamentally changes how it's played. In Brawlhalla, instead of picking a character who just has a set moveset and it's always the same, in Brawlhalla you can pick a character who has two different weapons. These weapons are items that you can pick up throughout a match that changes your moveset massively. And since everyone has two weapons, to some extent you almost have to learn two different versions of your character, which is really cool. And it's probably the best take on having items in a competitive platform fighter ever too. Oh, and let me just say this before you comment it. Brawlhalla isn't actually an indie, it's developed by Ubisoft, however it's clearly much more of a work of passion and love for the genre rather than just some licensed crap. So I'm putting it here with the other indies. But just keep that in mind, that Brawlhalla has a much bigger budget and much more support behind it, which is a big reason for its success. And if you are unsure of how successful Brawlhalla really is, which is totally understandable, I also often forget that Brawlhalla is massive. But on launch, the game had over 10,000 active players just on Steam, and it also has a very sizable console player base. And for a long time, even after launch, Brawlhalla was just growing, reaching a peak concurrent player count of 34,000 multiple years later just on Steam. The only thing is, Brawlhalla really doesn't share all that much of a community with other platform fighters. Brawlhalla has very much established its own player base, which is really hard to do and insanely rare within the space. But it's also so separated that people in my circles often forget about the game. So I really wanted to make sure that I gave it some time because it is a very interesting game. After the launch of Super Smash Bros. For Nintendo 3DS and Wii U, the future of the franchise was kind of up in the air. I mean, at some point Sakurai would have to step down, right? He's been saying that he's done with this franchise ever since Melee, but he just keeps coming back. Would Smash 4 be the final Smash game? Well, I think we all know the answer to this. On the 8th of March, during a Nintendo Direct, we would finally get confirmation for the next Super Smash Bros. Game, which would come out for the new Nintendo Switch. And immediately, the hype train would begin. After a couple of months, E3 2018 would roll around, and here they would reveal the now iconic Everyone Is Here Super Smash Bros. Ultimate trailer. I think a lot of people will agree with me that the Ultimate reveal trailer is one of the best reveal trailers ever. Ultimate's gimmick this time around is that every single character from any prior Smash game would be returning. One gripe a lot of people would have with the previous Smash games is that characters would often be scrapped from game to game. I mean, if you just absolutely loved to play Wolf in Brawl and you just wanted to play him more, you can imagine being a little bit sad to see that Wolf just isn't in Smash 4. But Ultimate would go above and beyond to bring literally everyone back. However, they weren't just doing that, obviously. There'd be multiple newcomers, many revealed in trailers before the game would release to build hype, and nearly a year after its announcement, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate would finally be released, instantly being praised for its great game feel, well-made characters, fantastic visuals, and interesting redesigns and restructures of old mechanics, as well as new additions to the game, making it, in many people's opinion, the best iteration of the series. The goal with Ultimate from a design perspective was to find a proper middle ground between the casual-friendly, slow pace of the games like Brawl and Smash 4, while still allowing for the hectic and skillful gameplay that the speed of Melee allowed for. If you've been paying attention, you might realize that this is seemingly the goal for every new Smash game. And you'd be correct, but it's only really when we get to Ultimate that I'd say that they actually succeeded in striking a good balance. So with some of the best gameplay the genre has ever seen, and certainly the most content of any game in the genre as well, the game was obviously a massive success. Fantastic reviews all around, and financially it would also do amazing, going on to sell 28 million copies as of 2022. outselling every previous game in the franchise by a landslide. However, there seemed to be two main complaints that people had with the game. First one being the single-player story mode, World of Light, which was criticized for being kind of rushed and boring, and the second was online. At this point, since Brawl, online had become a standard for almost all fighting games, and having sharp and well-made online could make or break a new release. Yet Ultimate would have absolutely terrible online play. In online games, it's pretty normal to have around 2 or 3 frames where the game waits to take your inputs. This is called an input delay. In Ultimate, this delay is 6 frames. In offline play. So when you're playing online, if it's bad, you can get up to 15 frames of delay. To demonstrate just how bad that is, here's a graphic that blinks green accompanied by a sound. Imagine that flash of green to be when you click a button, and then that sound being when the game registers your press. This is 3 frames of delay. Here is 6 frames. And here is 15. I'm sure you can imagine just how frustrating that can be if you're trying to react to something, even if you're playing casually. But even with these small issues, I cannot overstate just how much of an icon of gaming Ultimate has become. Similar to Smash 4, shortly after Ultimate's launch, the addition of new fighters coming to the game in form of DLC would be announced. The first round of characters, or Fighter Pass, would include Joker from Persona 5, Hero from Dragon Quest, Banjo-Kazooie, Terry from King of Fighters, and Byleth from Fire Emblem. Once these were all released, some time would pass, and then the second and last Fighters Pass would begin, including Min Min from ARMS, Steve from Minecraft, Sephiroth from Final Fantasy, Pyra and Mythra from Xenoblade, Kazuya from Tekken, and the final character to be added to Smash Ultimate, Sora from Kingdom Hearts. I'd like to return to the future of Smash and talk more about Ultimate in the present day a bit later, because in the years since Ultimate released its DLC, a lot has happened in the wider platform fighter space, which I really want to mention first, but keep Ultimate in the back of your mind for later. When thinking about the post-Ultimate boom in platform fighters, one that might spring into mind would be Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl. But to talk about Nazby, we should probably talk about the Nazby developer's previous game, Slap City. Slap City was yet another Melee-inspired platform fighter originally released into early access in late 2017, before even Ultimate. However, the game would go into full release years later in September of 2020. And Slap City was actually pretty well received, getting good reviews and a good amount of players on Steam. And not long after the success of Slap City, the developers, Ludosity, would be contacted by Nickelodeon to develop a Nickelodeon platform fighter. But they were a little suspicious at this email at first, but after realizing that it was actually Nickelodeon asking them to make a game for them, they got into contact with Fairplay Labs to co-develop and Game Mill Publishing to publish the game, and thus began the process of making Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl. Eventually, the game would be revealed in July of 2021 to a lot of hype from the platform fighter community. But even outside of the niche community, it seemed to make quite a splash, since the trailer would get almost 3 million views on YouTube. Eventually, the game would release in October of 2021, and its reception, well, it wasn't great. Pretty quickly, people would realize that Nazby was a very flawed game, and would to some extent fall into some of the same flaws that Icon's Combat Arena would also suffer from. It just didn't feel all that original. Many things felt like rip-offs of Smash mechanics and moves. While many of the characters were interesting and beloved as characters, there wasn't any voice acting in the game, making it feel kind of lifeless. The game overall just failed in making you feel like the character you were playing. You could obviously make something incredible with the IP they were given, but most of the characters just ended up feeling like husks of their original characters, and most casual players pretty quickly gave up on it. But maybe competitive players enjoy it? And while it certainly made its own community of fans that did like it, to many the game just felt off. On top of some of the pretty rough balancing and weird design decisions, it also wasn't really appealing to the pro scene. While it wouldn't get great reviews, getting a 65 Metacritic score and a 5.5 user score, which isn't all that great, but on launch it actually did amazing, hitting a concurrent player count of over 13,000 people on Steam, which is amazing considering the really high price point of $50, which in no doubt also pushed some players away. So while people maybe didn't like the game all that much, it still seemed to sell really well, but over time people would quickly drop the game. After just 6 months, the game was often at less than 100 players at a time. But the devs didn't give up, and would eventually announce a sequel some years later. I'm not going to go too deep into Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2, because sadly, Nasby 2 would hardly reach the heights of Nasby 1, even though Nasby 2 is a much better game. And genuinely, Nasby 2 is really good. But after Nasby 1, no one really trusted them to be able to make something good, especially at the price point of $50. So while it was much better received critically, Nasby 2 would only ever hit a player count of 2,300 as its peak. While not bad, it is sadly just not comparable to the originals, and it's sad to see a genuinely good game sit at just 20 players today. Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl is a story of how a flawed release can ruin the reputation of a series forever, which is sad because Nasby actually brought a lot of interesting things to the table, like air strong attacks, and eventually in the sequel, the slime meter, which is honestly one of the best mechanics I've seen in the genre. But it just wouldn't be enough to make up for the massive disappointment of the first entry. The story of this next game is an interesting one, hitting historic highs and devastating lows. Twice. On October 27th of 2021, Hungrybox, a well-known figure in the platform fighter scene, would tweet an image showing the characters of a leaked Warner Brothers platform fighter, known as Multiversus. This would be many people's intro to Multiversus, but even before that, it was known that a Warner Brothers platform fighter was in development. At the time, there had been closed tech tests being held for the game under NDA, however the public's first look at Multiversus would come in November of 2021, following the leaks with an official announcement trailer. For the next many months, the game would be in steady development until in May of 2022, where the game would get yet another trailer announcing the closed alpha playtest of the game. This closed playtest would end up with a concurrent player count of 8,000, which is kind of ridiculous for something you had to sign up for and receive access to. Not long after the alpha, the game would release into an open beta for all to play, and quickly it was praised for its unique take on the genre, with a focus on 2v2 gameplay instead of the genre standard, which is 1v1s. Which would also allow them for a much more interesting design space, allowing for characters' kits to be designed around supporting their teammate, for example. Multiversus also brought some new mechanics such as cooldowns, which allow for some interesting design decisions as well, letting the move be useful and strong, but not completely centralizing and spammed. On top of many people just enjoying the game, it hit the highest concurrent player count of any fighting game on Steam ever, with over 150,000 people playing it all at once, just on Steam. But just as quickly as Multiversus reached unseen heights, the game would start seeming a bit off. People started to realize how flawed the game really was, with some of the big complaints being bad netcode, making you lag all over the place, bad balancing, and worst of all, shallow combat. While not at all a bad game, it was clear that there was a lot of things to work on and problems for the dev team to solve. These things is what, in my opinion, would lead to the game slowly dwindling in players, eventually dropping down to just a couple thousand not long after launch. In a bit of a drought for the game, they would announce the very decisive decision to take down the game and release it in a better state later. Not long after this announcement, the game would be officially closed down, leaving its servers unplayable online. After almost a year of waiting, Multiversus would finally re-release in late May of 2024, once again hitting some insanely high player numbers on Steam. However, you might realize soon that this really means nothing, because with the new release, a lot of things had changed. The biggest and most controversial one being that the speed of the game had been slowed down for some reason. And if you remember when I talked about Brawl, you might realize that if a sequel slowed down something, it probably wasn't going to be received very well from the existing community. And predictably so, it was massively criticized for just how shallow and slow the game was even 2 years after its release. Along with all this, the new release also came with some overhauls to the game's monetization. Multiversus has always been a free game, so of course it has microtransactions, which is pretty standard for the modern state of gaming right now. However, this time around it felt especially greedy. A new addition to the game, Rifts, a single-player mode, was massively impacted by the game's larger focus on monetization, including purchasable lives and power-ups. This time around, it was also much harder to earn new characters. In its current state, Multiversus is doing fine. Its player base is quite consistent, and I'm sure it's making... Hey, editing clouds here. I wrote most of this video back in November of 2024, but then Multiversus has announced that it's closing down its servers and shutting down for good. So yeah, Multiversus isn't doing fine. But the most recent update, Season 5, did add a lot of cool stuff, but yeah, I mean, the game is literally shutting down, which is really frustrating to see because it's a pretty special game to me, considering that I met a lot of good friends through it, and in many ways, it's guided me towards my life today, as well as Multiversus being the game I started making videos on YouTube. So it'll always have a special place in my heart. However, it's also not surprising to see the game failing the way that it did with the amount of stupidity that went into Multiversus. So, do you remember Icon's Combat Arena? I talked about why it failed earlier in the video, and we came to the conclusion that, well, the game was just kind of stinky. But with almost all games, some can see the potential, and there was one man who saw potential in Icon's Combat Arena and decided to purchase the IP after the game closed down. He then started working on a game called Vortex Rising, a reimagining of Icons but without the loot boxes and an original design. As this project kept going in scale and scope, it eventually became what we now know as Rushdown Revolt. Released on Steam in January of 2021, Rushdown Revolt is built on the Icons IP with characters like Raymer, Afi and Galoo, Kid, and probably the most popular one, Zurong. I don't know how to say that. All being in the game, but remade to be more original and fun. And I gotta say, they really nailed the characters in this game. And if you also can't tell, the game is really stylish, with a really cool art style. But outside of just visual changes and rebalancing or whatever, Rushdown Revolt has a new mechanic very special to the genre called the Spark Meter, which allows you to cancel the end lag of any move you hit into a dash, which you can then perform an attack out of, and so on and so forth. It's basically like Project M on Adderall and 18 cups of coffee, which was already a game probably on all of those things. The idea for this mechanic arose from Project M Turbo Mode, a mode in PM that lets you cancel the end lag of all moves with another move. However, it was obviously insanely unbalanced considering that the game wasn't designed around canceling moves. But if you design a game around being able to cancel all the moves and made it actually balanced, it's a very, very cool concept, and at high levels let people do some absolutely insane stuff. Oh, and if it wasn't obvious, this makes the game insanely hard to play. It is probably one of the hardest platform fighters, or just fighting games, in the world. But it also makes the top level play seem so absurd, which I think is really cool. Although Rushdown Revolt is one of the coolest platform fighters I've ever seen, it is incredibly small, with player counts often hitting 0 on Steam. But how does that even make any sense if the game is so good? Well, that's because I'm talking about Rushdown Revolt in 2025, which is honestly amazing. However, its launch was far from perfect, with drama, internal turmoil, money problems, and poor leadership all contributing to the game's failure. Today, the game has 2 devs working on it for the love of the game, literally, and I really hope that you guys check it out after this video. There's some insane lore to talk about as well, but I simply can't cover all that right now in this short section, which I'm really sorry about. But I have some plans to make sure that this game gets the spotlight that it deserves. However, that will have to wait for another time. Also, Aether Studios, you should hire these guys, they're really good. But now we move on, or more specifically, we're going back to Ultimate to talk about what the future holds for Smash. At the time of writing this, Ultimate is nearly 6 years old. Ultimate is truly a work of art. It's the culmination of all the previous entries and so much more. Currently, Ultimate is not receiving any updates or patches outside of some small bug fixes here and there. And its home console, the Switch, is nearing the end of its lifespan. The Switch is over 7 years old, and its successor has been confirmed to be coming at least within 2025. Since the jump to 3D, there's been a Smash game on every single Nintendo home console. It's kind of a given that Smash will be on the next console, and I don't see a world where Nintendo would just drop one of their best-selling video games literally ever. What a Switch 2 Smash game would look like, we of course have no idea. But it's not unreasonable to assume that it would be a port or a remaster of Ultimate, but a lot of people expected Ultimate to be a remaster or port of Smash 4, so hey, maybe we get a whole new game. But where can you really go from Ultimate? Ultimate's whole point is that everyone is here, there's nothing missing. What more do you want? Of course new characters and stages would be nice, but could that really warrant its own original game? Personally, I'm not a massive fan of the gameplay in Ultimate, as I prefer more melee-like gameplay, which I would love if they catered to more in a remaster, but that is highly unlikely in my opinion. Since Melee, Sakurai has been trying to distance himself from the series, but he always ended back on it somehow. But Ultimate really feels like a finale to me. While I'm confident in some sort of follow-up game to Ultimate, I'm not so sure about Sakurai's involvement, if it isn't a relatively small project like a remaster or port with some small additions. Oh yeah, and I should probably talk about Slippi, huh? If you weren't aware, Melee is old, really old, and when released there was really no possibility of online play. But since Melee is just that good and the community is just that dedicated, eventually a group of modders from Melee would make Slippi, a mod that lets anyone play online within your region. But it isn't just online, it's really good online. Like really, really good online. It's so good in fact that if you have a connection below 40 ping with someone, you actually have a less laggy match than if you played Smash Ultimate with someone offline. And Slippi kind of saved Melee too. Beforehand, you obviously had to play offline with people if you wanted to get better at Melee, but when a certain pandemic hit in 2020, that obviously wasn't really an option. But that's where Slippi came in and saved the day. And while we don't have any stats for play numbers or anything like that for Slippi, it's hard to imagine it's anything but really big. And from just rumors, it's clear that Slippi is massive. In the modern day, where making a game has never been easier, there's a ton of cool indie games being made in the platform fighting genre that I quickly want to talk about and highlight. Most of them also take a really unique spin on what a platform fighter even can be. First off, I want to mention Byte Breakers, a very early development prototype game made by Odyssey Interactive. And while you're looking at that right now, it may look pretty normal, but Byte Breakers' main gimmick is the fact that it's a battle royale. 40 people all on the same map searching for loot and resources, and all being pushed towards the center of the map, eventually being forced to fight. The game is not even confirmed to be coming out ever, and I would love to see it in a more polished state. Next game is Entropoly. Entropoly is unlike all other games I've talked about today because Entropoly is a single player game, which admittedly kind of removes the whole fighter part of platform fighter. It's a platformer game with the movement of a platform fighter. It's also heavily inspired by Celeste, but what platformer isn't nowadays? I highly recommend you check out Entropoly. It wasn't really my cup of tea, but I think it's really cool. Next game is Spiritfall. Similar to the last game, this is also a single player game, but it retains the fighter part by being an action roguelite. It's similar to like a single player mode in a platform fighter, but it's much more fleshed out than you would ever find in such a game mode. If you enjoy games like Hades but want a familial game feel to a platform fighter, you should really try Spiritfall. It also has some really cool collabs with platform fighters, but yeah, the game is just really good. Next game is Combo Devils. Combo Devils is a still in development normal platform fighter. And with normal, I just mean it's your classic 1v1 player versus player type game with all the things you can expect. However, Combo Devils takes a unique approach to the genre with many mechanics and features very inspired by traditional fighting games, and a heavy focus on combos, as the title would imply. Due to the game not being out yet, I can't quite tell you about the neat details, but I'm super excited to try it out once it does come out. I also heard that there's a beta coming soon, so that's pretty cool. Now, let's talk about Rivals of Aether 2, but I'll make it quick considering how I've already made 2 videos where I talk about it. So yeah, Rivals of Aether 2. It's the sequel to Rivals of Aether 1, or well, it's actually Rivals of Aether, but I don't care. But remember how Rivals 1 didn't have shields, ledges, grabs, and a whole bunch of other things? Well, in the sequel, all those classic mechanics are present, but also some new additions like Ledge Special and Get Up Special. This time around, Rivals 2 takes a much more Smash-like approach that's heavily inspired by PM. But the character-focused core of Rivals is still very present, and is certainly what sets it apart. Rivals 2 brings the older style platform fighter into the modern age with all the stuff you can expect from a game nowadays, with a proper buffer system, lenient inputs, good online, developer support, and pretty much anything you could wish for in a game like this. And while it's no Fortnite, for the size of the team behind it and the fact that it's just a niche genre altogether outside of Smash, Rivals 2 is doing really well. Financially, we can see that it is just based on sales numbers, and the community is thriving. The player counts are steady, and people are just excited to see the future of Rivals 2. Just in general, the future of platform fighters is looking good. There's many great games coming out within the next year or so, but just the selection of games right now are great too. And with that, I hope you now understand the history of the platform fighting genre, how it progressed from the brainchild of just one man to eventually being a pop culture phenomenon, yet also a tiny little niche for nerds to create their own takes on the original foundations laid out by Sakurai so many years ago. Thank you so much for watching. Hi, if you reached the end of this video, I really want to say thank you. This video was a massive undertaking, but I'm proud I finally got it out there after multiple months of working on it. Also, remember to like and subscribe or something? I don't really know. But I'll see you in the next video, I guess. Bye bye!